Thank you.
It's cool in here. Good afternoon and welcome. There's not a lot of people here to watch our discussion on the elimination of the municipal officers allowance. I'm not sure. Maybe they believed the news article that it was an increase. So we'll talk about that later. First, I'd like to call this meeting to order. It's the Finance, Culture and Economic Development Committee meeting of Wednesday, June 13th, and it's 1:01 p.m. We did have a order paper circulated, so a motion to adopt that agenda. Thank you, Councillor Seegers and Councillor Lutz. Any additions or deletions from staff? No late items, nothing. Okay, all those in favor? That's carried. And we can move then quickly to the minutes of May 9th, 2018, a motion to receive and adopt. Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Lutz, first moved by Councillor Seegers. Any errors or omissions? Oh, have they been to council already? They're May 9th. They were probably at our last council meeting, so we adopted them then. So we'll just take a motion to receive. And all those in favor? Any business at the committee level that people want to raise? If not, we can move directly to our first item of business and what I thought was the main issue. Item 6.1, pages 5 to 25, and we did get a replacement, or I did, because it was misstapled. Motion to receive the report. Thank you, Councillor Seegers and Councillor Lutz. All those in favor? And then we'll turn it directly over to Mr. Kootenay for the report.
Yes, the report is a collaboration of three senior staff that deals with the business case as well as the debt servicing financing strategy and also the approval for electoral options. I'll speak just briefly on the business case as I provided previous reports on that. This is really not a typical business case. It does not include options as we were directed by council as we had the approved design provided to us back in 2017, and we're directed to go right to a cost estimate, which we provided. So that leads us to the request for financing. I'd just like to also mention that we've also had Dennis McMullen from McMullen Associates. He's our occupational health and safety consultant to review some options of the design, and he provided his input on that. So I'll basically turn it over now to Doug to talk about the financing.
Thank you. And Mr. Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So yeah, I first off, you may notice I put in a bit of a contingency in the proposed budget. This was based on the discussion that came up at the last meeting that concerned that perhaps there would be some cost escalation depending on when the project began. So I am proposing just to basically round up the project to 4.8 million. But bearing in mind, of course, that we'd only borrow what was required to complete the project. So if the cost estimates are solid, then we wouldn't borrow as much as required. But I use those numbers to then provide a financial strategy as far as how we could pay for this the construction. So I tried to look at the cash flow because you can see it does change depending on how we actually process or spend the money for this project, on the basis that we would probably initially do some short-term financing, interim financing with the Municipal Finance Authority, and then ultimately do a long-term debt to repay that short-term financing once the actual costs of the project were complete. And because MFA only does 2 intakes a year, there's obviously timing issues involved with that. So my projection was basically that the project would span 8 months from construction, sort of from March of 2019 through to about October, and the assumption that it would be spread somewhat evenly, that the cost would be about 12.5% each month, or $500,000 that would be acquired through the advance funding from the MFA. And then on the basis of that, we wouldn't actually go to a long-term debt until 2020 once the final costs were determined. So with that in mind, the actual costs for this project, the increase to the budget is about $47,000 in 2019, $93,000 in 2020. That's the total cost, and then $238,000 from 2021 and thereafter. That's the total debt servicing costs. So to fund those increases, it would require, if it was all done through property taxes, a 0.55% tax increase in 2019, 0.54% in 2020, and then a 1.71% in 2021. So a total impact of 2.8%. That's based on the current 3.21% interest rate from MFA. And at that point, there'd be no further tax increases. We'd have $238,000 in the budget to service the debt until it was matured in 25 years. So that's the proposed debt or funding strategy.
Thank you for that, and I'll turn it to Council and Councillor Inkster.
Thank you. I'm thankful to Mr. Stewart for presenting this report directly in reference to how the annual debt cost will affect the tax base and the increase that may occur every year, and how it goes to a high in 2021 and then obviously disappears because I guess it replaces the previous debt we were paying, in a sense, with the long term.
Essentially, no. In 2023, the debt servicing for the Justice Building and the RCMP building ceases, it matures. So that certainly frees up about $200,000 in debt servicing costs in that year. Theoretically, you could choose to reduce taxes that year, not use that $200,000 to reduce taxes in 2023. So it depends on how you want to look at the numbers. But this really is proposing a full 2.8% tax increase by 2021 to fund this. How a future council chooses to deal with the savings from debts maturing it would be up to them. And that was part of the reason of not, bringing those numbers into this discussion, because I felt it was too far off to be discussing what a future council may want to do in 5 years' time.
Yeah, okay. I mean, that's how I look at it, and we'll see what the future council makes a decision, but as well as the money that comes in from those areas, the rental of that building will come in to help perhaps defray some of those costs that we don't have to then put directly to the debt. So it makes me more comfortable, because that's how I've looked at the retirement of our debt, and how municipalities such as ours that are relatively young municipalities have to continue to build infrastructure and, in a sense, do debt replacement. Although after a number of years we have to then look at this building again, and but hopefully we'll be ready for it. And I'm also thinking that this building may not need much addition other than some upkeep, because we'll be moving some staff over to the other buildings. So that's sort of my larger view of our future costs. Thanks.
And just to clarify, the 2023, is it the end of the fiscal 2023 that the debt repayments on the Justice Service Building disappear? So it's 2024 would be the first year of potentially reduced expenditures?
2023 is the reduction. It's there's about, I can't remember the number. The interest on one of the debts, there's two servicing, comes off in 2022, and then 2023 there is no debt payment. So 2022 is the last year of debt servicing for the Justice.
So in this case, there would be an 18 months, about 18 months to 2 year overlap when this building was coming on stream, and the other one hasn't actually been fully paid, about 18 months. And as you say, that's simply one potential decrease in expenditures. We have no idea how that would be viewed at the time. And as Councillor Inkster indicates, there may be additional revenues at that time too. But again, they're speculative for today. Yeah, third question.
Mr. Chair, you had indicated that there was a 18 month to 24 month, I guess, lag. We don't exactly know, because Mr. Stewart probably wasn't expecting that question, although I'd love to know what the month difference is between the two, between not paying a debt and continuing with this one, we will say, because we did the borrowing already. This decision, I mean, I know that we really need to strongly consider moving in this direction and looking at our options presented us, the two options presented today. But my decision will be made easier and more comfortable going forward if we provide some needed infrastructure without an additional large tax burden to the taxpayer. So I think we're going in that direction, and that's why I'm glad we're talking about it, and we're talking about the questions of the differential and dropping one debt and picking up another.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion on the report, clarification, and then we'll get into the actual recommendations. Councillor Seegers?
Thank you. During this process, I don't know right now, I mean, you'll know right now whether or not this project could potentially qualify for some infrastructure funding through some of the grants. Does it qualify under the current guidelines? And if not, when through the process, if something came available, could we actually apply for something? And what I'm getting at there is I know that sometimes if a project is already in process, it no longer qualifies. And I don't know what the infrastructure grants that come out from the federal and provincial government actually lay out with regards to that.
I certainly looked into it. As far as I can see, there's no grants available at this time for us to apply for. And typically, and certainly on the federal government ones, you're absolutely right. When the date the grant's approved, any expenditures prior to that date are generally not eligible for grant funding. So essentially, we'd have to have this approved. If we were to start construction in the spring of 2019, it would have to be approved by the spring of 2019.
Yeah, it's interesting. The federal grants and provincial grants are so often tied to, well, they might be tied to that as well, but they're also very clearly tied to things that are visible, such as health, sewer, water, roads, and the basic infrastructure of government, of course, like buildings that we need or trucks and things like that, we have to do on our own. Councillor Mueller.
Yeah, I was just curious what kind of analysis has been done with this project vis-a-vis the financial sustainability plan, and how, if we were to approve this, how that would affect the financial sustainability plan.
Basically, because I'm putting it together as it all being funded from it as a tax increase specifically for this project, I didn't see it impacting the financial sustainability plan, which would still have that 3% increase every year to cover the amortization of the current assets we had. So again, a council decision in the future whether they want to continue with that, but I'd assumed that 3% would still be happening, and this increase would be on top of that as well. So we wouldn't be interrupting the plan that's been adopted.
So then, if there were perhaps other operational increases asked for by staff in future budget years, they would have to be added to this, and then regardless, there will be a 6% year, another 6 or 7% year, and that's regardless of any operational increases.
Not in 1 year necessarily. Assuming just if next year all we did was the sustainability plan, the 3% in this, you'd be looking at a 3.5% tax increase, another 3.5% in 2020, and then a 4.7% increase in 2021, and then operational increases on top of that. So, again, assuming you don't want to disrupt that financial sustainability.
And then in 2022, there would be the beginning of additional funds from the Justice Service Building, or not till 2023?
2023 is when those monies will become available.
So you see this as 3.5, 2020, 4.5 in 2021, and then the 2023, this would come on fully, and the other one might. Okay. Any further, Councillor Inkster?
Yeah, I think the rec facility tax and it will drop off in 2025 as well. So there's all these things that drop off. We don't know what will happen in its place, but I'm just saying that looking forward, so things start disappearing, hopefully, and we obviously replace them with other borrowing, but it relieves, hopefully the overall tax burden stays similar.
Further discussion, then I'll make a recommendation, and then we'll go forward. Councillor Seegers, please.
I think most at the table here recognize that we need the building. And so, recommendations 2 and 3 actually talk about that. And then the other piece that we need to talk about is how we actually get permission from the public. So I'd make recommendations 2 and 3, put those forward.
Recommendation 2 and 3 moved by Councillor Seegers, seconded by Councillor Lutz, and speaking to that, Councillor Mueller.
So, this is obviously a big price tag. This is a major operational decision, major budget decision moving forward. I think that, when we asked for the business case to be updated and, finalized, I guess, and we've been around this table and waited for 3 years for that business case. We've approved funds for this project in almost every year. I didn't like that there wasn't options explored in that business case, and I think it's something that needs to be done because even if council was to vote for this, we can't assume that it's going ahead because the community still gets a say, and we know how fickle they are in terms of spending money. I think that really needs to be done because this price tag is something that the community might just reject. And I know council, we need to understand is that we got this far with the library renovation that came in then, the final numbers, over 2 million, and council rejected it even after we'd accepted the design and otherwise. And so I'm going to wait to hear what other councils have to say about this. I have serious concerns about spending this money. I was looking for a cheaper option. I was looking for value, and it has never been presented. So those are my concerns.
Councillor Lutz, and then I'll speak to the issue as I see it. Councillor Lutz.
Thank you. Do we know what it's cost us to do our work out of the existing complex in the almost 7 years that we've been there? Do we know what that cost has been? I mean, this over 25 years, we're talking $200,000 a year. I'd be curious just for myself to know what it's cost us to work from that facility.
I give some basic costs that we've looked at. Really, the only cost really is the hydro and the rent of the trailer. So the hydro costs there are approximately $3,500 a year for the hydro at the Public Works Yard, and then for the parks, about $10,000 for the hydro at for the parks facility. And we rent a trailer at a cost about $5,000 a year. And so that's basically the cost.
Thank you.
If I may speak to the issue, I think we should approve the two motions that are in front of us now and move those forward to council. This has been a long and difficult process, and not meeting our levels of satisfaction probably at any particular stage of the day, including today. But we have to remember that how long this has been going on and the kind of convoluted path that it's taken. First, of course, this was a decision made by a previous council, and they did put money aside because they knew that it had to be addressed, and they gave direction to staff to begin to address the issue, though without any time really to get into direct design issues, but it's something that has been needed and identified as needed for some time. When we were elected in 2014, the superintendent of works, at the time, had it under his care and had gone forward with designs from an architect, and then had also given us some sense of what it might cost. And I think we need to let go of that informal sense that it could be done for much less money, that it could have been a $2 million project, because the very first time we asked for a survey to actually give us a sense of what it would cost, it came back at 3.75. Now, the superintendent of the day said, "Oh, no, I can still do it cheaper. I'm sure I can pull this along." But of course, that's not the case, and that individual isn't working with us any longer. And so the fact that it got off to that kind of a sole source architecture, and then the time for us to call for a real needs assessment and the options that we're talking about was back in 2015 when this first came for us. But in fact, we allowed it to proceed because we knew it needed to be done, and it got into another stage. The senior management team that are with us inherited something that was also a pig in a poke and hardly developed. So they didn't have an opportunity to go back and say, "Oh, what do we really need and how should we do a business case for this?" So it's actually something that they inherited. They know council's approved it, and council has been pushing it forward, and that council's been unsatisfied. But it isn't really that there are options out there. So I think the price tag is more than councillors want to address, but it reminds me of a song that my old friend Louise from Victoria used to sing on a regular basis in her repertoire. Everyone wants to go to heaven, nobody wants to pay the bill. And that's really all it is. It's just sticker shock and the fact, but we're a government and we have to provide basic infrastructure, and operations centers and operation buildings are part of that infrastructure, just like the second floor is. Nobody wanted to pay for the municipal hall in 1993 when it was proposed either. And yes, the community rejected the price tag. It didn't mean that we could have continued to be meeting in the municipal hall on Inlet Avenue, which is now the alternative school. And if you've ever gone over there and taken a look at those, 1,400 square feet, and realized that that was the entire operations, there was no room for it then. Governments simply have to provide the infrastructure and facilities necessary for good government and staff to continue working. So yes, they cost as much as a small house now on the waterfront, $4 million. That's not an overwhelmingly large price in today's world. It might be in the minds of a number of people, but it's not a lot of money. You could spend it pretty quickly along the waterfront in Sechelt. And lots of people do. So I think we're getting quite a bit for it. I also agreed that the business case wasn't the business case that I was expecting and that we actually were looking for it. I was kind of hoping for something that was quantitative and would show me some real numbers that we were going to already spending this amount and we'd save this by doing it, and we could justify the expenditure in a more technical way. We're not going to get that solution. It's actually not there. This is building a building that doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. The alternative that people are looking for is an open field on Lot L. And we can't continue to ask and expect a high-functioning staff to work in an open field in Lot L, because that's what's going on. A couple of old portables, a rented trailer, and some open sheds. This is actually providing the infrastructure we need over time. Is it a lot of money? Not really. Is it a good tax hit? 2.3% when it's fully done without any other savings will be pushing our tax bill overall higher, but we simply have to pay the price of what government is. And taxes in Sechelt are low. They're lower compared to many, many other jurisdictions of the same size, and they're lower than almost all jurisdictions in the Lower Mainland. And the people who are living here are expecting normal city government and infrastructure. They're phoning us for public works. They're sending us letters because we're not doing the maintenance. Well, staff can't do that work well without the facilities, and that's not just backhoes, and it's not just graders. It's places to work on those graders, places to have lunch, places to hang their coats, places to clean up after work. That's what this provides. So I think we have to simply quit dithering over the $4.8 million, accept that that's the price of doing business in today's world, and proceed. It has to be done. So I'm recommending that we support these two motions, despite our misgivings about small aspects of the facility. Any other discussion? Director Wright, please.
Director Wright, thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Wright. Councillor Wright. You're sitting too close to the director.
I thought I got hired on permanent here, okay.
And tomorrow you can be director.
Yeah, tomorrow will be councillor, okay. I think that the whole process for the design of this building has been flawed from the beginning. And I said that before. I'm not happy with the price. I think that we're building a building that is overbuilt. And I'm not talking about in terms of growth. It's just plain overbuilt in many aspects. So I'm going to support this recommendation, but I want it I'm very reluctant. I am right on the edge of not supporting it. And I guess if this hadn't been dragging on so long, I wouldn't support this building. But it has been dragging on. yes, the staff that work in this building need to, and I read the business case, need a warm, safe place to work. Well, I'm going to tell you, I think you could have got a building a whole lot cheaper than this that was warm and safe. The staff that work in this building work outside. They work outside in the summer, they work outside in the winter, they work outside in inclement weather. And I read things in there about the fumes. There's ways to deal with the fumes, and I'm afraid to even ask that question. But I will support it, but it is with great reluctance. And I'll leave it at that. I'm not going to go into it any further.
Thank you. And Councillor Mueller.
I think council and staff both need to understand that there's a big disconnect between what goes on in Community Hall and what goes on in the community in terms of value and what value means and what they expect for the money that they're paying. And this, of course, didn't start today. It goes on a lot of ways, but if we did have a financial sustainability plan written down for the public to see, and they were able to see that every single year there's $3 to $4 million of depreciation on our assets that does not go funded. Every single day that I've been here as an elected councillor, I've been trying to deal with this issue, and it's painful because that's a lot of money. That is a huge fraction of our overall budget, and that's really what I come to work here every day to try to do, to try to deal with that. And I've been chastised for it in different ways, but at the end of the day, I just don't see that it's fair that that type of a depreciation and ultimately a payment, a future payment required from future citizens would go on every single year without a clear way of addressing it. When we're asking for this type of money from the community, we're going to need a rock solid business case, one that we can go on an election to, and really say to the community that we dealt with all the options and that we looked at them, explored them fully, and that we explained it, and that it is rock solid and airtight to for us to defend. And I just don't see that with this business case, so I won't be supporting it.
Thank you for that clarity. And any other discussion on the issue? And I know it's been fraught for many councillors. Councillor Seegers and then Councillor Inkster.
Thank you. When staff puts the information together, I'd request that they go back in the previous documentation where staff went out to the community and looked at other locations, other buildings, other options before deciding to actually build our own. They did explore what was available in the community. They did explore, building a metal building to see if there was some other option they could come up with. And they didn't find anything at that point that would meet the needs existing or for the future. So I know that documentation exists. It might take a bit to find it, but I remember reports coming forward on that previously. Right. Thanks.
And Councillor Inkster, thank you for that. And this is a report that'll have to come to council depending on the decision that's made today.
Yeah, as has been indicated, this is quite a high price. But if you've been in this game as long as some of us have, and others who have watched the building industry, we're seeing the prices go up, even in terms of this building and the changes, Justice Services building, the rec facilities, and even the prices go up from there, and how the economy is going. And this project has, and the discussion of it, and the needed changes and or provision of better work conditions for our workers has been discussed by us and committed to over a number of years. I've heard that. So we really need to make this decision to go forward, to do something to fix some of the things that this council has identified as issues and problems. I don't know if further discussion, further delay will help those that need a better place to work out of, will help the public receive a better price on this building. I think the price will just go up. And I think it's, I talk about this lots over my years, and I'm like Councillor Wright, I have to see the best price we can get, and I'm not sure if the price will go down and get any better. And I just think we need to move forward, and that's why I was looking for some tax requisition in a sense, reductions over the next number of years, and weighing all that in the decision for me to, to support this. And then our next decision will be how we ask the public for their support. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Lutz?
Thank you. I too support these recommendations. It's long overdue that we start work on this project. I have said before that we were remiss in the past in not putting enough aside so that it wouldn't be such a hit on our taxpayers. But I agree too that the price isn't going to go down, and to build something substandard with the district of Sechelt on it just is not acceptable to me, and I doubt that it will be to the community, and I'm sure we'll find out. Thank you.
Any further discussion before we call the vote on these two? Then I will. We're looking at recommendations 2 and 3, moved by Councillor Seegers, seconded by Councillor Lutz. All those in favor? Any opposed? One opposed? And we'll have that noted. And I, just as we move on to the next discussion about whether it's an alternate approval process or bylaw by assent or referendum, I would say I don't disagree with much of what was said by council. I think we can acknowledge that the process was flawed from the start, but we can also acknowledge that as it came forward, a majority of council has supported the various designs as it went forward, and we did turn our minds to other designs and other options. And I can also totally agree with Councillor Mueller that we need to be able to explain how this fits in with the financial sustainability plan and the ongoing deficit in amortization, or the deficit in infrastructure that's been continually there. We're working away at that. I think we have a good financial plan, and I think that Director Stewart gave us an opportunity to understand over 20 years how the financial sustainability plan will take the bite out of these kinds of decisions. But it can't take the bite out of it now, because we're just developing that plan. We're just building up that, and we have not yet eliminated that annual deficit in the depreciation of our assets. And you've been working on it since you arrived. Others have as well. We're getting close. We're very close to actually funding our operations with tax revenues, which is a good thing. And pretty soon we'll be able to deal with the infrastructure deficit as well. But it's not easy to message. And I agree that it is something that will come up in the election. I'm quite aware of that. I'm quite prepared to discuss financing, long-term financing, with anyone in the electorate who wants to have that discussion. So now we look at the issues of whether we do an alternate approval process, which is approximately $2,500 and gives the community a chance to express their concerns and opposition, or they could simply say we want to have a referendum, or the question of whether we go directly to a referendum, which costs about $25,000 and $20,000, estimated cost, and perhaps a little bit less if we did it in October for general voting day. Any discussion? First of all, we see the outline, which is on page 9, so people can see the two differences between the two processes. And then if there's no clarifications required, I'll look for somebody to move A or B so we can have a discussion of that. Councillor Mueller.
I'd like to move 4B.
For B. And seconded by? Well, then let's see if we get a motion for 4A that's approved. Councillor Lutz, and seconded by Councillor Seegers. Okay, we're still going to have a vote one way or the other. So arguments in favor of having an alternate approval process rather than the bylaw by assent, and then we'll look for those opposed. Why is this a good idea? Councillor Lutz.
I like the timeline better for an AAP. It means that the decision will be made pre-election, and I think that's a good thing because it's something we're putting forward. I like that there is time afterwards to submit responses, and the price.
Any other comments? And Councillor Mueller.
Yeah, I was leaning towards 4B, and the reason is that it completely depoliticizes the issue. We know how hard alternative approval processes are to overturn in terms of if there was an electorate, and we have to kind of put ourselves in the shoes of someone who might organize against this and realize that will be happening in advance of an election. And it's going to spread through the community in a way that may not be helpful when it comes to election time. If we were to choose another route rather than the AAP, it would basically allow the next council to move forward with community consent, and in that way we know it's such a large price tag. We know that the community is behind it, and so that's why I was not in favor of 4A, and I will not be supporting the vote.
Councillor Inkster.
So I'm sort of, a number of weeks ago, I was looking at referendum, but, you know, I'm very well aware of the history in Sechelt of some of these borrowing issues, and we may, and consequently, we may need to strongly consider and or vote today, obviously, on the AAP process. The issue for me, if we go in either direction, is that we, and I'm assuming we go in the AAP direction based on what was moved and seconded, is that we communicate properly and clearly and often to the public why the option was taken, if in fact we can even speak to that, but what the information is around that particular approach and the information around the operations center, why the council decided to move in that direction. I think that's important. Hopefully, in some cases, our arguments and our integrity and our gravitas is strong enough to, and I shouldn't even say strong enough, I said has enough of a presence so that people give some good consideration to that approach. I do see the price tag difference, although based on the overall cost of the project, that doesn't sway me necessarily because the overall cost of the project and how small that is compared to that. So, you know, those are my reasons. I just am concerned about the historical things that have occurred in Sechelt with any other process.
Okay, any other comments? Councillor Seegers, and I'll put myself on the list as well.
Yeah, question to staff. Under both processes, we do a loan authorization bylaw. Is the bylaw the same, and just how it's actually presented to the public different, or is the actual loan authorization bylaw different under each process?
Your Worship, through you, it's exact same. The loan authorization bylaw, the borrowing process that the ministry requires and all of that is the same. It's just the process by way you reach assent of the voter.
Okay, so a follow-up to that. So if we were to do, I'm just throwing this out there, if we were to do a loan, an AAP, and it got defeated, we would have the loan authorization bylaw that would shorten down the time if we needed to do a referendum or wanted to choose to do a referendum. We could potentially do a referendum then subsequently, and it wouldn't take the same time frame.
Do a referendum on general election voting?
Yes.
Yeah, I was actually just counting that through. It would be really tight. For example, a couple of things. You know, if you count back from October 20th, the earliest you can start advertising a referendum is 30 days beforehand. And then when you count back that we'd have the 30-day AAP process, the 2 weeks. I mean, in essence, we'd pretty much, without having scientifically counted this down to the day, we'd have to bring a loan authorization bylaw forward to July 4th council for 3 readings. It would then go to the ministry. We need a couple of weeks at least for the ministry to approve it at 3rd. And then we would proceed with advertising in the 30 days. That takes us to, it would be so close in the sense of maybe a 3-day difference. I mean, I can do a better count it through the calendar, but because then we'd have to re-advertise for referendum. All the advertising would have to be done again. That's another 2 consecutive weeks. it would be, I don't want to say yes right now. I mean, it would be so close down to days. And then that includes maybe having to have a special council meeting. You know, I'm not even including council dates because you'd have to come back and approve that. So
Okay, thank you.
I can come forward with that information, but it would be pretty tight.
I think that would be useful, though we have no control over the ministry. When it's sent to Victoria, right, it could take 2 weeks, it could take 3, and that could change your numbers.
That's true, yeah.
On the other hand, I didn't know if that was an argument for leaving it to general election day or not. It sounds fairly close on this. And the last thing you'd want is to have a new council elected in November, and the first thing they have to do in January is have a referendum on spending. But maybe they would have maybe that would be clarified in the election and they would know what they needed to do.
I mean, the reason I'm bringing it forward is if we were to choose to go forward, there's a huge cost saving if we can actually do it on general election day. If we choose to do a referendum, if the AAP does fail. That's why I'm looking at the timing.
So my sense, as many of you know, I'm generally in favor of things that increase democratic participation, and a referendum would normally have more participation than an AAP would. But in this case, I think there are a number of times when we do not have referendums, when it's simply not appropriate. I don't think it's appropriate to have a referendum on a zoning issue, for example. I don't think it's appropriate to have referendums on human rights issues, which the provincial government once did on Indigenous rights. And I don't think it's appropriate to do a referendum, which is basically asking the community what they want to do when there is no choice or no option. And I think that, in fact, this building falls into that category of basic infrastructure. It's like putting in a sewer plant or a water plant. It's putting in basic public infrastructure for the government, and therefore it's not really a situation where council shouldn't care what the results are, or take it either way. If you want a swimming pool or don't want a swimming pool, that's something the community can rightfully make decision in terms of their values. Whether you want public works staff or not isn't really something you'd take to referendum. Should we have a CAO, and should we have this amount of money in the CAO's salary? I don't think so. So these are the kind of things that have led me to think this is mostly technical. If council in fact knows and feels that this should go forward, then I think we should have the confidence to say, yes, this is important. We do need technically the assent of the voters, and that's the way to do this. If the voters say, no, we want to have a referendum on this because it's important, then I would like to see us turn it around and get it done for general election day. Though the point made by Councillor Mueller about it being political or politicized would be interesting. I think it's a bit of a moot point. I think if it's on election day, it's going to be politicized, regardless of what happens, and it may in fact be more politicized if it's on the same day as election, because everyone will have to be lining up in support or not in support. So if it's an alternative approval process, we've said this needs to be done, this is the price tag, we need your support, assent to do it. And if 10% say no, we want to call the vote on this, we want to call a community vote, that's really what they're doing. And I'm willing to do that. But at the moment, I don't think we need to do that. So I'll support the AAP, surprisingly, actually, because I usually really, I'm quite negative about them. But in this particular case, I think it's something we can do with respect, and also with respect to the community. So I'll support the AAP. Any other discussions? Then we can call the vote on the motion in front of us. The council seek approval of the electors for the loan authorization bylaw by alternative approval process in accordance with Section 86 of the Community Charter. All those in favor? Any opposed? Another opposed? And that conducts our business on that issue. Moving then to this next item, 6.2, offset to address the elimination of the municipal officers allowance. First, a motion to receive the report. Thank you, Councillor Lutz. Councillor Seegers, all those in favor? Very brief report, but I think we'll still turn to the Director of Corporate Services to speak to it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, so the report actually deals with two issues, if you want. The first one is the impact of the federal government's decision to eliminate the one-third tax-free remuneration that council gets. So we have done a calculation of what that would mean to each of the positions, mayor, acting mayor, and councillor, essentially proposing that the district increase the remuneration as indicated here for a total cost of about $13,500. Should be noted that, of course, all this does is allow council's net pay to remain the same. So unfortunately, really, the approval is to send $13,500 to Ottawa. That's really the net impact of this, but the alternative would be to take more of council's pay and send that to Ottawa instead. So it's really, like I say, it's not to increase council's pay other than to remain net based on Revenue Canada's new rules. I did go through a bit of history. So the second part of this was to suggest that a remuneration policy actually be drafted. We don't have one at this point. In 1999, a bylaw was adopted to establish council's remuneration. At the time, that's what was required. When the Local Government Act was changed, and I guess the community charter, I believe that provision for the requirement of a bylaw was eliminated. I'm not sure it was actually dealt with properly because council has since made resolutions to increase their pay, which is fine, but the original bylaw was actually never rescinded. So we have a bit of a conflict there. So my suggestion is that ultimately we could prepare a proper council remuneration policy, rescind the existing bylaw from 1999, and we could also look at that point other issues or considerations dealing with benefits, a regular increase based on CPI, and would allow for that discussion if council wished to get into that, or it could simply be a flat rate. Again, all options are open to council, but to bring forward some sort of policy to just make it official.
Now, just correct me, and maybe other councillors will know better than I, but I thought we did have policy, unwritten policy or informal policy, but policy nonetheless, that did deal with cost of living and with annual adjustments to the salary. That's never been the case, or Councillor Inkster?
I think that there was, whether it was policy or not, and reflective in the previous decisions up to 2014, I'm quite sure that that discussion came up in 2015, and there was an indication, I believe from yourself, to not continue that in 2015. Okay. And I don't know if it was a motion, but I know that it didn't continue after that. It didn't seem to continue after that, so.
Yeah, I don't recollect anything except having the assumption that it in fact was a practice.
Yeah, it had been until that time, and then there was a discussion over some of the tight budgets we were dealing with and some of those things that were going on in 2015, and that's the only indication I had as the chair.
So salaries have been effectively frozen since 2015? Is that the understanding of staff as well?
Yeah.
That's my understanding that, yes, it was set in 1999, and then nothing changed until 2009 when council passed a motion to increase the remuneration to 2009 and 10, and then nothing again occurred until 2014. I guess January 1st, 2014 is when the last increase came into effect.
So there was a resolution in 2009, and then there were annual increases coming out of that resolution?
No, the resolution simply just specified increases in 2009 and 2010, and that's all that occurred. Yeah. And then nothing happened again until
Councillor Inkster is suggesting that if you looked at payroll, you'd see that there were payroll adjustments every year through there until 2015. That'd be interesting to know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I recall. And the earlier ones, 2009 and 10, there was a discussion, and we did put some information out to the public and asked the public if they wanted to be part of a remuneration committee. And unlike previous years, no one stepped forward. So I asked the administrator at the time to come up with a proposal to make some changes to the remuneration of the council, and there were some recommendations that came forward for 2 years as what would be seen as a catch-up, and then it ended at that point. And then you hear about the change that was then made in 2014. But as I said, I haven't seen.
Very interesting, because I've been operating under the assumption for the last 3 or 4 years that I have no idea what the monthly check actually is, but that there have been adjustments made every year. And when people ask me, I say, yeah, it's adjusted every year. So if I'm the one who actually stopped that, it didn't sink in. It didn't sink in. I didn't know it happened.
And the adjustments that.
And I apologize for those who might have missed some increments over the last year or two, but the real issue we have to deal with today is, do we think the next council, elected in October, should earn less money than the current council or not? And if they should earn less, then the question is, how much less? Should we reduce the mayor's salary to zero? Or should we say that the current salary is sufficient and therefore adjust it so that in fact they're paid the same as this council? And the tax accountable, it's called a non-accountable allowance. And I've done some reading on it in the last while, and it's right up there beside the clergyman's residential allowance. And they're allowed an allowance for their residents, and elected officials have until 2019 been allowed an account for expenses, and it was always expected to be covering all those additional expenses that we have in public life that you don't have in normal employment. And I think that for good reason, the federal government realizes that some of that has changed over the years, that we don't attend as many galas, or we don't feel that we actually have to expend a lot of those expenditures that we once did. So make it fully taxable, but then our question is, should they get less money going forward? And I would argue they should not get less money going forward. So I saw Councillor Seegers and then Councillor Mueller.
I thought under the Perryville and Taylor work that we did, we actually had passed a policy that had a cost of living increase automatically applied to council.
I wouldn't disagree with that.
So I think we need to hunt for that.
Yes, I wouldn't
I think
disagree.
that exists. So that's one issue. The
We
other,
might need some retroactive.
maybe, whatever. So the calculations you've done here indicate that based on using basic personal tax exemption amounts. So the TD1 form that we'd fill out, we'd say the basic. And this would actually increase to cover off the income tax and other deductions that would be taken off of that extra third. Is that what I'm correct?
That's correct. Basically, we would be taxed and CPP and EI would be applied to it. Yeah, we really couldn't know what other incomes,
Right.
other deductions you may have. So this is just assuming basic pay, and this is.
And so you base that on the lowest tax brackets,
Yes,
as if this was your first income, your first council income, or the first mayor's income.
that's right.
Yes.
Okay.
So quite frankly, and I think the community should know this, there's probably not a member of council who will not take home less money under this. Certainly, I think every one of us will take home less money, and the community doesn't understand that at all. Any other discussion? Councillor Mueller.
Yeah, I just wanted to offer a couple comments because I know this is just going to be rife with, misinformation. Those that think that we're trying to give ourselves a pay raise. This was a decision brought down by the federal government, which I do not agree with. But then again, Canadians decided to give a rookie cabinet who ran on budget deficits a massive majority. So I can't really disagree with that. But they're looking under every rock and hard place to try to figure out how to balance their budget. And I guess why not look after the stipends of volunteers on community boards across the province and across the country. And I think it'll probably continue from there. But the tough part is that unfortunately it can't really go down. I mean, those of us on council have tried to deal with both of the outlays of time, and the stipend is more or less just evenly balanced. And I'm thinking of some of the younger people in our community that may be wishing to run in the upcoming election. The stipend simply can't go down for them, and so I'll be supporting this. But I'm definitely not in agreement with Bill C-54 and the idea behind it, which was to claw back a really important support federally for mayors and councils who are volunteers across the country.
Thank you for putting the focus where it should be. Councillor Lutz.
Thank you. And thank you, Councillor Mueller. Very well said. I kind of like the mayor's idea that we just put it all to zero. Then we wouldn't have any competition in the next election. I mean, we're having trouble finding people to run, especially of a younger age, just because it isn't sustainable for a family. And this certainly will do nothing to encourage people to run for municipal office. No, we can't reduce the next council's pay. I think we have to make it clear to the community that this isn't affecting us tomorrow. It's going forward in January of 2019 when there could quite possibly be new people in every seat, and they shouldn't be punished. Thank you.
And Councillor Inkster?
Yeah, I think that this just brings, in a sense, and I think maybe the public needs to know this and we could explain it to them and/or hopefully it's reported clearly, this just brings us back to even with these adjustments being made. I think it's a 0.16 percentage change in our tax requisition from the public, 0.16, and I got to talk to Mr. Stewart later about what that will mean to the individual taxpayer. I'm assuming it's about $1 or $2. Although I don't want to belittle that amount, but I will ask him later if we have a simple formula to figure that out. And it is true, we need to have some sort of compensation that will encourage those to step forward because as Councillor Lutz said, there would be no competition, but I can tell you there might be, and everyone that runs for council will look like the characters from Monopoly. That's who will be on council. So just letting us know that we need to have something that's a fair amount of compensation for the work that's done that encourages more people to be involved. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the comments from all three councillors, the last three that spoke in terms of what it means to make sure there's a diverse recruitment of candidates, especially in terms of age. And community often complains that it's either all retired people or all wealthy people or all people with independent professionals, and the only way to deal with that is to make sure it's fair for those who don't fit those brackets. People who are not retired, who are not independent professionals, who are not wealthy, also need to be compensated in a way. And I'll say again, this is not about making it zero. I will be earning less if I'm back in this seat next year. Any other discussion? Then we go back to our motions. Recommendation 2 is that, oh, sorry, Councillor, you fine? Recommendation 2, that Council approve an adjustment to the Mayor and Council's remuneration to offset the impact of the elimination of the 1/3 non-accountable municipal officers' allowance on net pay. Can I have somebody to move that as read and not as written? Thank you. Seconded. And by Councillor Lutz, and I very clearly read out that Council approve an adjustment to the Mayor and Council's remuneration to offset the impact of the elimination of the 1/3 non-accountable municipal officers' allowance on net pay.
Adjustment, not an increase.
It's an offset, and I think we should see that for what it is. And then second, motion that directs staff to prepare a council remuneration policy for consideration. Thank you, Councillor Wright and Councillor Seegers. So both of those together. All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. One big ticket item and one small ticket item, but both of them with lots and lots and lots of baggage. So we'll try our best to explain that to the community, and those that are watching on YouTube, thank you. And I hope that the understanding of our decisions are clear. Motion to adjourn the Finance Committee meeting. Seconded. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much.